Imagining Tomorrow with Emma Newman. Episode 6. Campaigning, collaborating, motivating. Imagine you're walking home on a summer evening after recently moving to the city. You call in at the local bakery, run as a cooperative enterprise set up by a group of local residents some years ago, to buy some fresh bread and a cheeky cake before stopping off to collect a parcel from the local grocers. You chat about the weather and how the solar panels are doing, and then go round the corner into the street where you live. Your flat is in the huge building at the far end. There's a mix of council-owned townhouses and a couple of smaller apartment blocks that were finished last year, built by the community housing group. You stop, surprised to see tables and chairs being set up in the middle of the road. It was already a low traffic zone, so the children playing around the large planters containing a riot of flowers is nothing new, but the street party prep is definitely unusual. A woman wearing a dramatically patterned blue and orange ashoke comes over to you, smiling. She's familiar. You've smiled to each other as you pass each morning, going to work in opposite directions. "What's going on?" you ask her. "It's Air Day tomorrow, my love," she smiles. "Didn't you see the announcements in the street group chat?" You shake your head. Where you used to live, the local group chat was filled with grumpy people moaning about dogs and burglar alarms, so you haven't signed up to the new one yet. "We have it every year, in memory of my grandmother," she adds proudly. "And mine." Another woman, her dress made from a vibrant Ankara print fabric, comes over. When she sees your blank expression, she adds, 30 years ago, a group of teenagers living in those flats," she points at the building you live in, "started a campaign for clean air. They were inspired by some girls in South London. Take a deep breath." You do so, feeling a little awkward. "If you did that here 50 years ago, you could taste the air. On the worst days, if you blew your nose, it came out black." The other woman nods. "People were sick all the time. Youngsters like you don't remember how bad it was. But those kids changed it, campaigned, pressured the political types. It all started with them. The community bakery," she points at the paper bag in your hand, "that started up because everyone knew each other because of the campaigning. Those planters, those flowers, the trees, the community solar project, none of that was here. When my grandmother was a kid, this street was full of cars and lorries when they went to school. Walking around in clouds of exhaust fumes they were. All that's gone now. And every year we get together to remember how far we've come. And to plan," her friend adds. "Plan what?" you ask. "What we fix next," she replies with a grin. That's just a snippet of a fictional future, inspired by the following conversations with people who are doing amazing things right now to combat, or in some cases reverse, environmental damage to create a better future for everyone. Let me tell you about an innovative campaign run by 3 teenagers from South London, fighting for the right to breathe clean air. Listen to young people talking about overcoming the challenges of campaigning and the joys and perils of social media. Join me as I imagine a tomorrow that is building hope in a changing climate, instead of despair. When I was about 13 years old, I was deeply worried about the ozone layer and wildlife habitat loss and acid rain. As I say this, I reflect upon how 2 of those issues have gone from being at the top of the environmental news agenda to almost being consigned to history. Sadly not when it comes to wildlife habitat loss. This was the end of the 1980s, and the world was so very different then. The internet was still just an obscure protocol used by universities to communicate with each other. There was no social media. Home computers were incredibly rare, as were mobile phones, and they were the size of house bricks. Good grief, I feel old. On the back of my bedroom door, I had a poster from the Body Shop, exhorting the need to reuse, repair and recycle. At some point, tired of my environmentally conscious activities beginning and ending with taking my little body wash bottles back into the store to be refilled, I decided I needed to do more. So I got in touch with a globally recognised charity, by post. They put me in touch with a local group, and I went along, filled with energy, excitement and passion, head filled with hopes of marches and placards. I was given a collection tin and asked to stand in the local shopping centre. I crashed back to earth, feeling awkward, miserable and disillusioned as I asked disinterested passers-by to donate. I did the best I could, took the donations back to the group, and never went back. I was reminded of that experience when, some years ago, my son asked if I would support him if he joined in with the Fridays for Future campaign and missed school to take part in a protest. We talked it through. I made sure he understood all of the issues and the potential consequences, and then when it was clear he did, I backed him 100%. I asked the parents of his other friends taking part over for coffee, and we planned a unified response to the school if it escalated. He took part, and I couldn't have been prouder. At the time, it also made me reflect upon how much has changed, and yet how much has stayed the same. We now have the internet, social media, and greater media coverage of environmental issues. The climate crisis is something that has passed from being one of those fringe topics back when I was a child to being the centre of so many conversations. This shift brings with it many opportunities and also pitfalls. We are more aware than ever of the precariousness of the ecosystem, of the many and terrible impacts that human activity has had on our climate, on biodiversity, on our chances of future survival. That awareness means we are more likely to do something about it. But at the same time, for many people, myself included, it brings anxiety and a constant sense of impotence in the face of political inertia, if not outright corruption, and denial of the climate crisis by those with the power to do something about it. In 2021, The Lancet published a landmark survey of 10,000 people between the ages of 16 to 25 across 10 countries, measuring climate anxiety, the impact on one's life, and how the respondents felt about the response to the climate crisis from both their own and other governments. The results were sobering. Almost 60% of all respondents reported themselves to be either extremely or very worried about climate change. 75% said the future was frightening. What's particularly heartbreaking is that more than 45% said their feelings about climate change negatively impacted their daily lives, rising to 75% in respondents from poorer countries in the global south. A link to the full results is in the show notes. The thing is, feeling scared, angry, anxious, and powerless in the face of the climate crisis is a perfectly rational response. And yet almost half of the respondents who shared those feelings with others reported being dismissed or ignored. Managing anxiety is hard enough at my age, let alone for young people just starting out in life. And in the face of political indifference, what can young people do to address these valid fears and find some hope for the future? One of the things that young people can do, even before being old enough to vote, is campaign to make their voices heard by those in power. I came across the Choked Up campaign via an excellent article written by one of the co-founders. There's a link to it in the show notes. And she was kind enough to give me an interview.
So my name is Destiny Boka-Batesa, and I am the co-founder of a campaign called Choked Up. We're essentially 3 people who grew up in different parts of South London And we all sort of agreed on the fact that we were all breathing really toxic air, and our friends and families and our peers were worse affected by this. But I guess there was another layer of social inequity in the sense that the communities that we lived in were densely black and brown and or working class, or were composed of a lot of minority identities, and we sort of felt as though we were, I guess, being abandoned or left behind or made to bear the brunt of, something that just isn't our fault at all.
The Choked Up campaign has a clear goal.
What we're aiming to do is to lobby and encourage the government to revise their clean air laws to ensure that the most marginalised communities, that being black and brown, working class, etc., are being properly protected in law, because it's really important that we sort of have the right to be able to breathe properly and breathe healthily, and our needs just aren't being met.
The Choked Up campaign was started in 2020, when the 3 founders were in lockdown, and so all of the initial planning took place online.
When things edged on to 2021 and, we could go outside, one of the first things we did was something called a guerrilla campaign, and that's basically just using, I guess, symbols to sort of engender a sense of provocation to the public. We created these mock road signs, and through that they displayed messages that talked about, the communities worst affected by air pollution. So some of them had statistics about who were worst affected by air pollution and why that's the case. Others were a bit more pictorial, and so I think one of my favourite road signs there was a red circle and it said pollution zone at the top, and then within the red circle it was all cloudy and murky, and you could really see the grey, and then there was a silhouette of a mother and a child, and they both had afros to really sort of stress the fact that it is black communities that are sort of being worse hit by air pollution, as well as loads of other minority communities. And that really sort of solidified our place in the clean air and the environmental movement, because obviously climate justice is beyond saving the animals and stuff. It's about justice for the people too.
At the age of 17, Destiny and the other co-founders were too young to vote in the mayoral elections, but thanks to their road signs, they were able to draw attention to the issue.
And what we did instead was essentially shape the conversation towards our favour, and so we were able to organise a panel so we invited all of the potential future London mayoral candidates, and most of them turned up, which was really, really good. And we were able to essentially just ask them questions about how their party was going to enshrine proper clean air policies within the London community. For one of the first times, we genuinely felt we were making a difference, and that we were sort of empowering our own communities, because now we actually had something that we could sort of hold people to account to. And it was really, really interesting and quite intimidating when you're 16, 17, 18 and you're sort of trying to organise something as big as this. And that was really, really grand.
The success of that initial phase of the campaign led to a period of networking, building relationships with other campaigners, and having conversations with local MPs. One of the things I loved about being able to talk to Destiny was hearing the opposite viewpoint of the dominating messages in mainstream media regarding the ULEZ expansion.
We were kind of involved with working with the Office of the Mayor of London with regards to the ULEZ expansion, which has caused a lot of contention and controversy, quite unnecessarily, if I do say so myself. I think that's been really, really good, because again, I think a lot of people, or at least the one thing that I kind of have issue with, is that a lot of people don't actually realise that London is a city that people actually live in. And because of the fact that we're so densely populated, in any part of London to be fair, of course there's going to be loads of transport links, loads of people, driving through, loads of lorries, loads of deliveries, loads of things that cause congestion and traffic and, gridlocks on my, commute to primary school, every 5 days a week, every morning. And I don't know, I feel like when people sort of slam the ULEZ expansion and get annoyed that they have to pay a little bit more to cross through London, it's not a money grab thing. It's a way to sort of reduce the burden and stress of polluting vehicles within residential areas. Sometimes it does feel a bit disheartening that people just don't really click onto that. And I understand that not everyone's going to relate to my experiences, but a little bit of empathy doesn't hurt in the real world, So seeing the ULEZ expansion has been really, really good, because it's expanded to the areas that I grew up in.
The campaign has evolved, just like the lives of the co-founders. When I spoke to Destiny, she had left school and was now studying for a degree. The team is now shifting their efforts from raising awareness towards political lobbying.
And actually contribute in conversations that we need to be in but aren't necessarily invited to. So really it's just a case of like securing a seat at the table through a very logical way is how we're trying to get through it. Because there's only so much awareness you can sort of raise, and there's only so many people that agree with you, which is grand, but if we really want to make change, it's about changing the minds of, or at least convincing those who are the most resistant to you, but also finding a way to sort of reason with them, because you don't want to be in a position where you're sort of like fighting against them if we're all, under the same roof or under the same sky, and we all just want to be able to breathe with safety and security. Yeah, that's what we really want.
As I spoke to Destiny and admired the work she and her friends had done, I also felt a profound sadness. What a burden to carry. At the age of 17, all I cared about was getting good enough grades to get into my chosen university and Star Trek, whereas she and her friends were not only studying A-levels, but also planning the Choked Up campaign. At the age of 20, I was purely focused on my university life, whereas the Choked Up team are balancing that with shifting into political lobbying.
Again, I shouldn't be doing this as a 20-year-old. I shouldn't have started this at 17. I shouldn't be doing this, but I also feel like if I'm not going to do it, then who will? Like, it's not fair that a lot of us are in this situation, but it'd be even less fair on ourselves if we didn't do anything about it. Yeah, and I think that's why I care so much about what I do, because it's not just me. It would never only be me. Campaigning is a lifeline for the people that I love, and also for those that have learned that they're also affected by the same things that I do because of how they grew up, or who they live around and who they live with. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's a lot of love that I have for just the people around me, but those who I never meet as well. And yeah, just to be I guess just being able to give one person that element of just justice and hope, is more than enough for me. And it's quite nice to know that I'm kind of already doing that with me and my friends. And yeah, no, I couldn't be prouder of the three of us sort of charging through all these sort of massive hurdles. It's a lot, but I feel like if you care enough, it's the one thing that keeps you going.
I confess, I cried when she said this in the interview. This work being rooted in love feels profound. But what kind of impact has this had on her life?
In a more practical sense, I think we're very much at the beginning stages of seeing a lot of practical change, because I feel like when you have policies and laws and stuff like that, they take ages to actually be properly manifested. So I guess not really major changes there, but we're definitely moving forward to then, I guess in comparison to what we've seen before, or at least from what I've experienced in my own life, I guess. And even with the ULEZ and stuff like that, I feel like that's going to take ages to really have an effect, because it's all kind of brand new, and that's okay. But in an emotional sense, I think I've been granted, or no, not even granted, but afforded just a lot of hope and just a lot of peace as well. Again, when you have climate anxiety, and you always have done, and you didn't know what it was at such a young age, you really don't know what you're doing with your life half the time, and you feel really, really alone, because who really talks about the environment in a normal day-to-day conversation? I mean, we talk about the weather at best, and so actually being able to just connect with people, whether it be on a superficial level or on a working level, that's okay, but on a much more profound level has been really, really nice. Connecting with people of colour as well in the environmental movement and in the clean air movement has actually been really, really sweet, because I feel like a lot of us are sort of stereotyped as people who don't care about these issues, or if we do care about certain issues, it's exclusively black issues, it's exclusively brown issues, it's exclusively Asian issues, which is true, but I feel like with issues that concern the global majority, everything is interlinked. And so that's kind of why I went through the climate justice route, because every single thing leads to environmentalism, leads to climate justice, like liberation of like the sexes and what gender means to us, all links to the climate movement, the issues with like colonialism and how we are still seeing the effects of today. Like, I genuinely think that the climate crisis and capitalism and everything that's kind of bad in the world, quote unquote, all stems from colonialism, which stems from race and the environment and everything that we see and, live and breathe around us, and the culture that we are living in, which is very unsustainable, by the way, or at least in the Western world.
If you're a young person listening to this, or the parent of a very engaged teenager, you might be wondering what you can do. What help is out there? Is activism even something within your reach?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are bogged down by the idea that, you have to be this amazing, most intelligent person ever, and you have to have a master's in, I don't know, environmental sciences or whatever. I'm like, I don't even do a degree that is environmentally related. I really couldn't. I feel like I'd be way too bogged down with information. It would burn me out. But like, but again, all you have to do is care. Like, that's genuinely all you have to do. Like, you don't have to have £1 million. You don't even have to have like the links and the connections to like press and, I don't know, the Guardian, the Metro, whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, the right things will come to you, I think. Read as much as you can if you love reading. It doesn't have to be books. It can be newspapers. It can be magazines. It can be whatever has some sort of provocation that you can sort of learn from. Join a grassroots organisation. They're usually community-led. Like, even with like Friends of the Earth, like, I know there's like so many different branches. It's not just like one big thing, which I think a lot of people get bogged down by. But like, that's not the case. There are so many local groups you can join. But most importantly, just talk. Just talk and talk and talk. Just keep talking, because you don't know what you'll get out of a conversation. And I think that's really cool.
To find out more about how grassroots organisations can help young people, I spoke to Rowha Mohid.
I am one of the peer mentors for the Climate Youth Society, which is part of the Friends of the Earth Youth and Families team. I also founded and am working on Guiltless Threads, which is an agency which looks into using multidisciplinary arts and design to tackle eco-anxiety, along with talking about race and social injustices. So in the role of being a youth mentor within the context of the Climate Youth Society specifically, I work with the mentees who are essentially going through this program where they can start their own campaign. They'll be able to get funding. It also gives them like campaigning skills. So there's like little snippets of like mini courses throughout the year. So it's essentially helping them with their own campaign, but also helping with any like personal professional development that they might need in order to like gain the skills to do a campaign on their own. It also involves hosting different sessions where I specifically looked into the intersections of race and climate.
If you'd like to find out more about the Climate Youth Society, you can find a link in the show notes. Considering the profound impact that knowledge of the climate crisis is having on young people, I asked Rowha if campaigning helps to alleviate anxiety.
I don't think it necessarily alleviates it, because you do keep reading about things, right? And you are like putting more of your time and effort into actually like trying to figure out how to essentially combat this feeling of anxiety. And when you do get a pushback from like the higher ups who are like, oh no, we have time. Like, there's still time. We don't need to change right now. It's not a great feeling, and it does cause more anxiety, and it does cause more restlessness, because it's like you put in so much of yourself when you campaign for these issues. And when that's the response you get, it's very like, what am I doing? But on the contrary, because always campaign with people, like always have people around you, really take like the power of community with you, because that's who you're going to rise up with again. So even though it's not, campaigning isn't going to like make you less anxious or like exactly solve your ego anxiety. It will become a space for you to heal as well.
It feels impossible to talk about youth activism without talking about social media. After all, the young people campaigning today grew up in a world with social media established and already influencing the discourse in society. Coupled with the impact of the pandemic, when socialization with friends during lockdown was only possible via social media and other online services, the intersection with activism can't be ignored. For many, coming across something on a social media platform is a more likely way of hearing about an issue rather than it being reported in the mainstream media. I spoke to a young activist called Milo about this, who wrote a short story that was shortlisted for the 2023 Orwell Youth Award.
I'm a politics student, but I'm on a gap year at the moment. And in the meantime, I've been tutoring and working a lot on content creation. So I've got an Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and dipping my toes into writing for magazines, yeah.
Milo agreed with my initial thoughts on social media being a double-edged sword.
A lot of what makes social media good is also kind of what makes it bad, in the sense that there's a low barrier to access, which is fantastic from the perspective that it means that more different kinds of people can use social media. And because anyone, you don't have to be qualified, can just like make a YouTube channel and start, espousing their beliefs. That can be great because then we can get people who maybe don't have traditional qualifications but do have lived experience to draw from, spreading their message. But you also get some really unsavory types.
For me, one of the most concerning aspects of social media is what's generally summarized as the algorithm, which means the ways that platforms such as Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, to name but a few, influence which content is shown to an individual's feed. They tend to create a sort of rabbit hole effect, because if someone watches or engages with a particular piece of content, the platform will tailor what they see next, giving them more of the same. It can very easily lead to radicalization, as alternative viewpoints are far less likely to be shown. The sheer amount of misinformation online is terrifying, as is the manipulation of social media by individuals, organizations, and political groups who are pushing extremist agendas. The algorithm makes it far more likely that if someone stumbles across one source of misinformation and engages with it, they will see more that agrees with that viewpoint and give a false sense of it being widespread and valid, because anything challenging is less likely to be shown. When it comes to activism on the climate crisis, this can have an effect on shaping viewpoints. The algorithm also dictates the sort of content that one is exposed to. For example, pushing short, shocking, emotionally provoking content above nuanced and carefully considered opinion, and bad news over good news.
I made like a recap of like top positive news things that have happened, and like that completely tanked. And I was like, are you guys not sick of doom and gloom?
Of course, even though the impact of this can be very sinister, I don't believe there is an active, conscious attempt on the part of the social media companies to create as much harm as possible. The algorithm is all about engagement, and all these companies are interested in is keeping people focused on their platform for as long as possible to increase revenue from advertising. They don't care if that engagement is people arguing in the comments, or harassing someone, or thousands of people downvoting a horribly misogynistic video, for example. I asked Milo what he would do if he was put in charge of social media, and by extension, the algorithm. His response got to the absolute heart of the problem.
I don't know necessarily that there is a change that I could make to the algorithm that would kind of like fix what the problem is. There definitely is a lot of conversation around alternative algorithm systems, But I think that what the issue more boils down to, inevitably, is the profit motive. Because the reason why we have the algorithm that we do right now is because that is what max engagement equals attention equals money. And switching to any other system would just be economically inefficient, and it just wouldn't last as long as there was a profit motive. But what I wanted to say, so that it isn't so like, oh, no, we can't fix anything, no, the world's gonna burn and die. There are people making and creating alternatives. It's complicated, and I don't think that we've necessarily come to a perfect solution. But one example that I find quite inspiring is Nebula, which is a creator-owned and run platform, and it is quite limited on a subscription model. The prices are very low, but there is still that cost barrier there. But it is just amazing the strides that Nebula is making in the content creation space. It's a worker co-op as well, which is just like fantastic. And they're funding really amazing experimental projects that just wouldn't really get made anywhere else. So I think there's a lot of hope there. And I'm definitely excited to see what else content creators are able to do to kind of bypass this current model, which is just not working.
I've been using social media for about 15 years now, and in the first half of that period, it had a huge and positive impact on my career. But it does feel like the social media world is in flux now, especially as legislation in the European Union is starting to clamp down on various platforms. There are lots of people who've seen the communities that they've built on their platform of choice being destroyed after buyouts, questioning whether there is a need to move away from social media altogether.
I feel like with the kind of decline in general dissatisfaction that's kind of mounting in a lot of social media spaces, especially TikTok, Instagram, and of course Twitter, I think that right now more than ever people are open to alternatives. And I think that if there was a time for some change to happen, it would be right now, which is good. I do think that interestingly, social media is kind of like taking almost a rentier capitalism kind of vibe, like almost like feudal vibe, in the sense that like social media corporations like own the platform, if you think about platform like land, and we are the ones who are working, and we still have to like pay rent in terms of our attention or advertising, and so on and so forth, or even like subscription models for things like Substack. And there definitely is a lot of like merit in like, okay, if we accept that this is what things are like, how can we transform this from this feudal system to a more communalist or otherwise sustainable system and direction? However, all of that being said, even when I think back to what Twitter was like before its recent downfall, I think that algorithms are a little bit of a double-edged sword, in the sense that they at once create enclaves and also draw in audiences and attention in a way that otherwise decentralized spaces aren't really able to do. And I love the idea of blogs, but I do think that there are some questions there about accessibility. I mean, there's a cost, but then there's also not everybody is a writer. Like, there's so many different ways now to get your voice heard. And I feel like maybe the best direction to go in would be to kind of like to push it towards a more equitable direction. And maybe that looks like, from increasing the cut of like advertising revenue that creators earn to starting creator-owned social media networks, whatever that looks like.
Whatever may happen to the social media landscape in the future, it still feels like, for now, a campaign will need to use it to try and increase awareness and connect with like-minded people. So I asked Rowha what she would advise young people do when using social media for activism.
My best advice is there's a difference between your personal brand and how you show up on social media as a campaigner and your personal life. So have those set boundaries from the get-go. Or if you're just listening to this now, maybe start thinking about that, because we put so much of ourselves into our work that I find it difficult as well, like to differentiate between my own like private self and the self that I put out into the world. Because the work I do is so connected to my heart. It is so connected to my soul. And it was like work, like really differentiating what are my boundaries when I do show up on social media. It's so cliche because everyone says it, but everyone's highlight reels, that's not their real life. Like, you can't compare that to your everyday life because everyone's just showing their highlights. So, yeah, be easy on yourself.
Having an active presence in a good social media community doesn't replace the benefits of having an in-person group of people supporting you on your journey. Thinking of the Choked Up campaign, being so rooted in the impact on people in a particular geographical location meant that the road signs were particularly effective. That's why it makes me so happy that Friends of the Earth actively helps to make campaigning accessible for young people and hosts in-person meetups. As Rowha says,
I think one of the greatest benefits is because we do live in such a world where social media has kind of taken over, some of the activist communities, they're very wholesome places to be in if you're in the right one. If you find the right community for you, then it's just such a different feeling because you kind of feel like you're woven into the thread of the world, I guess, if that makes sense. So what I would also say for anyone who hasn't yet found like that community, because there is a lot of racism in some of these groups, and there is a lot of like ableism, and they're not the prettiest of places at times. But what I would say is don't give up on finding your people within the space because they are there. If you need that time away, take it, because I needed that.
speaking to these inspiring, intelligent young activists made me wonder what the world would be like if more young people were supported, where campaigning was made more accessible and they were genuinely listened to. What kind of world could we have if things really did start to shift in line with what young environmental campaigners have been asking for? This is what Rowha thinks.
I think we could really start like a whole systematic change if we do actively work and listen to youth and like actually working within all the generations, because there are good ideas out there. There are solutions that are already out in the world that will help us like slow down climate change. They just need to be acted upon. It's really like, I think we'll have a more innovative world.
As a science fiction author, I like to play with ideas and potential versions of the future created by changing just one thing. I asked Milo what he thought the impact would be if only people below the age of 30 were allowed to be in government, just as a thought experiment.
I think that the instinct, especially in a lot of the older generation, who are maybe more left-wing, is to assume that a government composed of young people will necessarily be more progressive. And that's rooted, I think, in the sentiment generally that my generation, that is to say Gen Z, are more progressive than previous generations. And I would say that a lot of questions that maybe were more heavily politicized for the older generations are kind of now receive a kind of bipartisan consensus on. So, for example, the topic of the climate crisis, you're not really going to get anyone in my generation who's going to argue that that doesn't exist. Where they might argue is in, the approach, and it's in
certain policies, like maybe a more right-leaning person of my generation might argue that we don't need to like impose any degrowth measures, for example. So I think from that lens, from that viewpoint, you could say definitely that my generation is more progressive.
Of course, not all of the discourse online is positive. Take the frightening impact of Andrew Tate on boys and young men, for example. Polarisation is a serious problem in all age ranges in society.
I think some of the things that we can definitely count on occurring if we had this kind of alternate governmental system would be that I think that we would have a lot more polarized and a lot more intense political discourse. I definitely feel that my generation is a lot more open to cutting people off and burning bridges and ending relationships over political matches. And I don't view that in a bad way, I mean. And there's definitely a false assumption that younger generation are very adept at technology and are immensely computer literate and are less likely to fall for scams and are less likely to fall for disinformation. And as far as I can tell, all the studies that I've come across have proven that to actually be the opposite of true. Not only are younger people likely to fall for certain kinds of scams, I would venture that actually maybe some, especially of the even younger generation, Gen Alpha, or maybe even less computer literate and have even poorer reading comprehension skills. And unfortunately, we can't ignore the impact of the pandemic and the combination of that, and then also unfettered access to the internet at such a young age in shaping Gen Z and Gen Alpha's relationship to the internet. The milestones that we typically associate with, maturity and development and how we think that people should be behaving at various ages is being disrupted. And some of the skills that we might have expected some of these younger kids to have developed by now just unfortunately isn't always there. I think instead, if I again had one wish that I could kind of use to bring about social change, then if I'm going super fantastical, I think I would go with everyone in society just magically developing an A-level understanding of sociology and politics. Because unfortunately, I think that is one of the biggest barriers to having a true legitimate democracy. How can we say that we live in a democratic society when most people don't even really necessarily understand what they're voting for?
Going back to Destiny and the Choked Up campaign, I asked her to imagine a point in the future when air pollution in London and all cities has massively reduced. What does she think would happen as a result of that?
In terms of morale will just be so much higher because people are going to be healthier. They're going to be happier. Their subconscious will just feel a lot more at ease with things. The people that are worst affected, kind of just slightly feeling better about themselves, increased life expectancy, better access to just healthier things, just a lot less illness, a lot less hospital admissions for things like asthma and stuff like that. A lot less intensity in terms of preventable illnesses as well. People are just going to be more at ease and just a lot happier, and then we're able to sort of delve into other issues that maybe aren't being resolved in the process. But again, because clean air is such an intersectional issue, everyone is going to be positively affected by it one way or another. Well, when we get to the point where people can actually reap the benefits of, campaign work and, getting a brand new Clean Air Act, then we're able to sort of push for other things. So if, access to water is the next big thing that we need to sort of work on, then we can do that and we can kind of fix the world bit by bit. But generally, I just think there'll be a better sense of community as well, because I just think that there'd be so much hard work that we put into actually making this a thing that these relationships would only just stay stronger and stronger and stronger, things would just feel a lot more utopic. And I'm so ready for that world. Like, I'm so ready for the world as it should be, because we're not designed to live in survival mode every single day. We're designed to live sociably, and we're designed to live happily, and we're designed to live at our own pace. And that's just not the case at the moment. But it can be one day. We've just got to, funnily enough, we just got to work for it. But that's also okay. Yeah, things will always feel like an uphill struggle, but I think one day it will just flip. Like, the switch will just flip, and things will just feel a lot more better. And I'm ready. I'm so ready for that.
Listening to people like Destiny, I can believe that things will get better. And I am so ready for that too. Please do subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode. And if you have a moment to leave a review, to tell a friend about it, or mention it on social media, that would be wonderful. You've just listened to an episode of Imagining Tomorrow, brought to you in partnership with Friends of the Earth. It was researched, written and produced by Emma Newman. To find out more about Emma's work, go to www.enewman.co.uk. If you'd like to find out more about how Friends of the Earth can help you and your local community to take action on a wide variety of issues, and maybe make some friends in the process, then go to foe.uk/community-group. Details about the people featured in this episode can be found in the show notes at foe.uk/imagining tomorrow, along with some resources you might find helpful. Have you got a similar story of hope and innovation to share? Have you been inspired by this episode? Tell me about it. You can email me at podcast@enewman.co.uk. I hope that you're inspired to imagine a better tomorrow.